Woohoo,
We are
recording to
recording.
cloud. Awesome. Okay, so this morning we're going to talk a little about using question banks, or what I like to call them pools. Possibly that's because I've been infected by Captivate, and that's what Captivate calls them. Captivate is not my favorite product on the planet. But so the past 6 months or so, we've seen a tremendous uptick in grading quizzes, tests, things like that online. Because we're not in the classroom. We're, working from home. We're remote learning. We're virtual. There are so many terms. I've been having conversations this week with colleagues. We've actually got, I think, 3 different terms for kids who are getting educated somewhere not the classroom. We've got remote learners, we've got virtual learners, and then we've got distance learners. And I'm just like, I think we're splitting hairs. Apparently, we're just going to talk about hair all day. But, splitting hairs. So a lot of people have, will ask questions about how to create good quizzes and how to prevent cheating and, all manner of things, how to make, questions more instructional, not just about testing, but how can we make kids, you know, make the evaluative methods a learning experience, not just a, you didn't know this. So these are things that I think quiz is really good at. Using question pools can let you reduce cheating. It can increase learning. It can, if you give kids the ability to take a test more than one time, they can learn more as they test if you use effective question banks. For most of the presentation, I'm going to be sharing my screen. And if questions come up as I'm presenting, Sasha, if you would just holler, because once I present, I won't be able to see that's one thing I don't love. I'd like to be able to see my chat, but that's Zoom for you. Sometimes it does a lot of things really well. That's not one of them. So I'm going to start with a couple of polls. And last I looked, about 10 of you had responded to my feedback in the course. Some of these polls are very similar in nature. So my first question is your experience level in Moodle. I personally tend to think expert is a misnomer, because I've been using Moodle for 15 years and I still learn something new all the time. I learned something new. I learned several new things yesterday, some because I looked for it and some because somebody told me. But I think learning is something dynamic, and it always happens. But okay, so we've got a couple of people who have been using Moodle for quite a while, and several people who have just started and haven't got as much experience. That's good. That's good. I know Rick has been in the Moodle community, if not as long as me, pretty close to it, if not longer. I don't know. Rick, are you over 15 years yet? No, not yet? Okay. So we're pretty close, 10 years, all right. I knew I'd been seeing you in the community a long time. So I have been using Moodle for 15 years. I started in 2005. I have been an admin since 2008, right about this month probably, 2008. This has been really an interesting kind of journey, because I am, Jamie would yell, I am not a tech person. I'm not a super fond of technology. I don't really care about technology, and yet I've spent the past 15 years of my life doing ed tech, which is kind of weird. All right, so I think I've got all the answers that I was looking for. That's good to know. Okay, so I'm gonna ask another question. How many of you use Quiz? Okay. All right, so a lot of you already have some experience with quiz and a few of you do not. All right, excellent. All right, so next is how often do you use quiz? And I kind of think of, you know, sometimes being maybe I have 4 or 5 classes and 2 of them have a quiz, or maybe I teach and I use a quiz once a semester, or maybe, you know, stuff like that. Okay, most people use quiz quite a bit. A few people don't use quiz very much. Good to know. All right. Every single day. Yes, I was 12 and married and had graduated from college. You're funny. All right. Okay. So what do you guys think? Can you test the same content if the students are not answering the same questions? This is one of the things we're going to talk about. Yeah, definitely. Absolutely, Rick, that's right. Well, it looks like most everybody thinks, yes, you can test the same content even if you're not asking the students the same questions. Great. I'm glad that people believe that's possible. Excellent. All right. And I'll talk about that. All right. Yes, life's not fair. And anybody who tells you differently is selling something. All right. So another question, do you use Games plugin or any other plugin that uses question banks? And if you don't know, that's okay. Okay, a few people do, most people don't. All right, that's good to know. Okay, all right, so let me make sure that my course is ready, and then I'm going to share my screen. I tend to usually have about 1 million tabs open, so please disregard my tab disorder. All right, so in my course, I'm going to go over here. So when I talk about question banks, I'm not going to start by talking about quiz at all. Question banks and quiz are, while connected, they're not the same thing. So I'm going to go over here to course management, and I'm looking for question bank. This is where you build quizzes. I strongly encourage people to build their questions before they build their quiz. And there's a reason for this. There are several levels that you can build quizzes at. Most people, teacher level, only see 2, and that's course and activity. But if you've got higher level permissions, earlier I was talking about how permissions, you know, roles are critical for doing a lot of things. If you have higher level permissions, if you're administrator, for example, you can create questions at the site level. If you have higher level roles in a category, a course category, you can have category roles. And some people have said, why would I create questions at the site level? And to be honest, I can't think of a good reason. Some argument might be made that you might want to put a quiz on the front page, but the front page is a course, so you wouldn't need that. Unless your entire course catalog had relevance to each other. I would, I wouldn't see any reason to put them at the site level. So category level, though, that's a totally different. And see, if you might use all your questions across all your courses, that might be relevant. Category level, maybe you have a course category that's, oh, I don't know, 18th century literature. So 18th century literature is a pretty big topic. We've got British literature, we've got American literature, I'm pretty sure we've got some Chinese literature. Sun Tzu goes back a ways further. There's probably a plethora of other opportunities. Maybe you have 15 courses on various different, literature from various different nationalities. And maybe you also teach things like, political literature, like, Thomas Paine, for example, which would be, I think, British. Yeah. So you've got all these courses, so maybe you create questions that are relevant to all those courses, and then you can use those questions in all your courses. But you want to make sure that those questions are properly tagged, perhaps. I don't generally use tags, but that's not because tags aren't good. It's mostly because I'm too lazy to learn how it works. Many years ago, when I first started using Moodle, there were no tags. And then when they were there, they didn't work very well. So now they're there and they work, but I just never picked it up. Feel free to use tags, they're great. So you want to make sure that your courses have solid names. It doesn't matter if the answer to the question is in the name of the question, because nobody sees those questions except for you. And other people with permissions to see the background question bank. So this is sort of where you go when you click on the question bank.
Melanie?
Yes.
Sorry, you had a question. What are tags?
Tags. Tags help you. You can use tags for a lot of different things. Early on, it was mostly for profiles. You add, it's like keywords that can be related. I don't use them, so I can't really say a whole lot about it. Some people love tags. I kind of think of it as like graffiti electronically. I don't know. Is anybody who's here using tags?
I have started using tags a little bit. And the interesting thing is when you want to pull questions from your question bank into a quiz, typically you would pull them from questions within one category. But if you're using tags, you could pull them in by a tag keyword. So these questions could be—
That is a great idea.
Categories. They could be in subcategories, but for some reason you may want to pull them into like a final exam, and you could pull them in if, for example, you used a tag called final exam, even though they're spread across categories. So
Sure.
it's another level. I'm not very good at this yet, but it's another level of sucking questions in from a question bank, and we're commonly doing it just within a category. I want to pick 10 questions from my 50. So it provides a very interesting feature that showed up, I don't know, about a year ago or so, and I ran into the need to use it once, and it's like, this is pretty powerful stuff, but not everybody would understand it, including myself.
That is a great idea, Rick. I love that. And Sasha, I do see a question you had on using tags for blooms. That's a great way to do it too. If you're looking for specific levels of learning, I could see that being terrific. And Valerie says, you have multiple days and multiple activities, so you use tags to pull questions for specific days. That's a good idea too. See, that's great. That's great. So what happened to my question bank? I totally lost it. All right. So, and what Rick was talking about, filter by tags, if I actually had tags on any of my questions, I could do a filter up here and then it would pull up any question with that tag on it. Actually, I can, okay, I'm derailing myself. I shouldn't do that, but if you scroll down, you've got this area in your question where you can add a tag. So now my question has a tag of fruit. So if I go up here and I search for fruit, it shows me just the one question. So that's how that works. All right. Okay. So what I was going to show you is, so by default, everybody has this default for name of course. And I will say mine is called Melanie Scott 2020 Sandbox course because I imported it from my Sandbox course because I started building it there and then I said, well, I don't want to lose all my stuff and brought it over. Up here, this is the course level category. So there's sort of a very top and then there's the default. Nope, that's interesting. So these are in the course itself, but when I talk about having other options, I've got to move my thing again. I will demonstrate really quick. This is my site, well, one of my sites, and this is a question bank for what we call Kids New Staff Training. Kids is the name of an application I teach. So here, my category list looks substantially different. So I've got a system level, a category level, a course level, and there's my quiz level. And I will point out, everything looks a little different depending on what theme you use. So, you know, I'm sure Rick's looks a lot different than mine because he tends to use, what, Fordson, I think. So the MOOC course, you know, looks a lot different than mine. Mine looks different than Rick's. It's going to look different than anybody's. So question, where you put the question is really important. I stress this because I strongly discourage people from putting quiz questions in the activity level. That's why I recommend you build the questions before you build the quiz, because if you build them in the quiz level and then you decide you want to copy your course and you want that quiz to remain intact, those activity level questions won't copy over. And that's really irritating. You have to go and export them and import them into the new course. I can't tell you how many tears I wiped up from people who had, after being told not to use activity level questions, then created all their questions at the activity level, and their next year's course was suddenly without any kind of questions. So, all right. So that's your category, your primary category. So what if you want more categories than just your default categories? In your question bank, you have four buttons at the top. It'll be questions, categories, import, and export. Categories is where you do it. So you can see my course has a bunch of different categories. Ignore the groups. I had this plan that I was going to let you guys build some questions and see how that worked, but I don't have permission to do it, so I can't. So you look at what you've got, and then down below there's add a category, and you choose where you want your category, and you just type in the name. And you hit return. And that's all you got to do. You can add a description, you can add an ID if that's what you do. I never use those.
We had a question, what do you suggest for categories?
For names of categories?
I think so. Would it be like a chapter or unit quiz level?
Yeah, maybe. It just depends on what you're teaching. Maybe going back to the British Lit example, maybe you have a category that's specifically, you know, a particular writer. Maybe one of your categories is Thomas Paine. Maybe one of your writers is, Ben Franklin. Whatever you want to use for that. In this case, so I'm building a fake course all about nutrition, and my topic for this quiz is eating the rainbow. So my categories are the different colors of fruits and vegetables. So I've named each one after color and whether it's a fruit or a vegetable. And we're not going to get into semantics about whether or not a tomato is a fruit or a vegetable, because, or a zucchini, or, we're just going to go with whatever. But however you want your questions categorized, that's what you go with. So I have 10 categories right here. You can see most of them have 8 questions. Red fruit has, 7 questions. Red fruit has 8 because I couldn't help myself. But so you just create you create the categories you want, voila, and you go back to your questions. If I put my red fruit 8 question in the wrong category, I can check mark it and I can move it, and suddenly if I only look at the questions in that category, I've only got the one, because I don't actually want it at that category level. So we're going to move it back to red fruit. There we go. And then click the button. All right. So I actually can see the chat right this second. So the arrows. So if you click the down, it moves it down in the organizational structure. This is the order that I created them. So you can just say, I don't want them in that order. I don't know why that would be. That might be important for you. I don't care. I'm going to name it about what I need it to be named, and if I decide, but I can move group 1 up, and it can be on top. I don't really want it to be a top level category, so I'm going to move it back down. You'll notice they're kind of they show up in the order they were created, so that lets you move things around. This lets you move, like if I wanted blue purple fruit to be top level, suddenly it's top level. I don't really want it to be top level. And see, if I want my blue fruit categories, oh, that was bad. Oh, that worked. Okay, good. And then I want my blue fruit to be together because I've mucked everything up. There we go, they're all back together. If somebody wants to sing So Happy Together, that would be okay.
Did you see the question from Jessica? And Mike also made a comment about course level questions.
Okay, just suggest having a lot more categories or using a tag function. I don't really have an answer for that question. It just depends on what works best for you. Personally, I think they would probably work together better than, and you can't see me, I'm like putting together hands. I think that they would work together better than choosing one or the other. If you're going to create a course, for example, this course has 71 questions. If I had them all in one category, the list of questions would go on and on and on, and eventually you'd want to stab yourself with a fork. My fork is on the other side, so I can, make the motion without risk of actually stabbing myself. So categories can do a couple of things. They can break stuff up so it's easier to look at, and they can also put them in topical areas. And let's see, Michael said course level. Yeah. If you set up roles for certain people to be able to see certain stuff, it can help prevent people who shouldn't make changes to making them. That was actually one of the things I was going to say earlier, and I got sidetracked. If you've got a category level question, and you put it, we'll say we put it in Brit Lit, and it's all about Thomas Paine and how much of a pain he really was. And then somebody says, I'm teaching American Lit. Okay, I'm going to grab a question from that category level base. Hey, look, there's a question about Thomas Paine. I'm going to use that question, and they pull it down to American Lit, but it doesn't belong in American Lit because it's Thomas Paine's British. So then they say, well, I'm going to just change the name of the guy, and they edit the question, and they change it from being Thomas Paine to being, I don't know, Benjamin Franklin. Suddenly, that question, it's great for the American Lit class, but the person teaching the Brit Lit class says, where did this question about Benjamin Franklin come from? And what happened to Thomas Paine? So if you change a question at the category level that lives at the category level, it changes it everywhere. So you don't want to miss out on that. Years ago, I had 3 courses, and they all did exactly the same thing, but they were based on different scenarios. I worked in corrections, and we were teaching people how to do risk assessment. So each course was doing a risk assessment on a different individual. So we created 54 risk assessment questions at the category level, and I created them all for the first inmate. And everything was all pretty and gorgeous. Put them in the first course, everything was perfect. I go to the second course, and I'm just like, hey, I've already got these 54 questions built. Yay. I just have to change them to reflect the new guy. Put them all on my thing. I changed all of them to reflect the new guy. And somebody said, hey, I got a question about the first course. And I go back and look, and suddenly all my first course questions are about the second guy. So sad. You don't want to have sadness like that.
So that was at the course level?
That was at the category level.
But the category was shared across multiple courses.
Yes. Yeah. Well, the 3 courses were all in the same category. And we ended up with this, and I had to go back and fix them. And then I was just like, okay, no more creating questions at the category level for these courses, because it doesn't work. Now, the same class asked everybody to answer a question, something like, for the scenario you've been given, how would you introduce yourself and your interview? That could be the same for all 3 courses, because it doesn't matter who you're talking to. You should probably present your, introduction the same way. So some questions are good to be used everywhere. Other questions, you don't want to do that. I'm totally okay with questions, Jessica. Questions are great. If you don't ask questions, you'll never learn. Also, I kind of figure if you've got the question, somebody else probably does too. So there you go. Yes, and you can create more subcategories, and your categories, your activity can pull in. I'm hoping to get to that. Balance the number of questions by category. You can't say there can only be 25 questions here, but you can manually decide how many questions go into each category. And you can choose in your question how many points each question is worth, and how many questions worth various point levels go onto your quiz. And you could even set up categories that these are 4-point questions, these are 3-point questions, these are 2-point questions. It just depends on what you want. Or you could do a tag, 4-point question. And that might be another way if you want to use different categories. Let's see. Yeah, importing, exporting is lots of fun. Yes, I will talk about randomization and categories in a minute. Hidden questions. Sometimes if a question hasn't been used in a long time, it will just deactivate. I'm not really sure why. Sometimes somebody will click. See, I'm not seeing it here. It used to be you could hide them, and I don't see a way to do it now, which is okay because I don't like hiding questions. But there's a certain point where they're really old and they just get hidden, and or they haven't been used in a substantial amount of time. And Rick has a comment about that.
I've encountered the hidden questions in a certain situation, and sometimes what might happen to you is you come across a question that you've created that is bad. You don't want to use it anymore, so you delete it. But I don't think those questions really get deleted. I think they get tagged as hidden, if I understand it correctly. So
I think you're right.
when it's deleted, it becomes hidden, giving you the chance or the opportunity to fix it and reuse it if you want to. But I believe if it is hidden, it will not be picked by the quiz if you're doing random picking.
I
That's
think that's true.
a way of describing it.
I hope that's true.
Yeah, that the system, what happens is if you don't like a question and you delete it, that question might have been used in a previous course. And if you're going into that previous course to see what did this student do in this previous course, you want to see that question. See, so it's there, but because it's hidden, it will never be used again. I think that could be the way that.
I think that's true. And if you're using randomization and you delete the question out, it's been used in previous, 10 people in, you're just like, wow, that's a terrible question. We're not using that anymore. It's still there on their quiz, and you don't want it to disappear entirely because they answered it.
Yeah, it's kind of like participants in your Moodle. When you delete a person, typically they are not deleted.
It takes a lot of work to make them actually go away.
Yeah, I know. You have to do a lot of work to get rid of a person.
And you got to hope you did it right and not deleted the wrong person. But yes, yes, it's a safety net. Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's also this checkbox, show old questions. There are no old questions, so it's not going to change. So that's that. Now, some other things I recommend. My naming is not especially great. I just named it Purple Vegetable 1, Purple Vegetable 2. Somewhere along the way, I think, it looks like I fixed it. Maybe it's fruits. Some of my questions went from purple vegetable or purple fruit to blue fruit because I couldn't remember how I'd named everything else. I do not recommend that you name questions by number. Question 1, question 2, question 3. Nothing but trouble. Because are you going to remember what question 1 is 5 weeks from now? I won't, I can tell you. Unless, like in my risk needs example, the question is specifically related to something. Like the risk needs assessment, question 1 was always, do you have any prior criminal convictions? So 1 meant always prior convictions, but if I went on to ask questions about, say, interviewing technique, question 1 would mean absolutely nothing. So think about what your quiz is. You can name your question anything you want. Make it descriptive enough that you know which question you're looking at. I will also point out there's this lovely little icon over here on the left of your question name. The first 5 questions in my category have the little dot and lines. That means it is a multiple choice question. The 2 dots, that's true, false. There are some other icons that mean other things. There are a lot of different types of questions. I think in a previous session, somebody said 13. There are a lot of question types. I will tell you, purple vegetable number 5 is a multi-choice question. So it's multiple choice, but you can choose more than one answer. And in fact, you should. Rick says he likes to use the first actual sentence of the question. That's good too. Yeah. And the quiz will auto-number your questions, so you don't need the numbers in the questions. That's also good. I've seen a lot of people like 1 in the question name, and I'm just like, you don't need that. If you want numbers, you'll tell it you want numbers, and otherwise you'll end up with 1 question. Or worse, randomization 1 3 question. And that just looks ridiculous. So, all right. So this is what I have to say about question banks. So now I'm going to talk about how randomization works. So I'm going to go back to my course, and I don't know if you guys could see my quiz. Quiz for demonstration, Eat the Rainbow. So I'm going to preview the quiz and you guys can see it. So you can see green category fruit, yellow category fruit. It's, you know, beets cannot be considered an orange vegetable, etc. Let's see, did it give me my really cool question? It did not. All right. So I'm going to say I'm bored now with these questions, and I can start a new preview as a teacher. Students cannot, and you can see that the questions changed. So how did I do that? So I'm going to go back to the quiz. Go back to the quiz. All right. So here's the quiz. When you first create the quiz, a quiz activity, you have to answer a whole lot of questions. And when you save it and display, it'll say there's no questions here. So you actually have to edit quiz, and that's not edit settings, that's actually editing the quiz itself. So as you see, I have a random question of blue and purple fruit. I've got a random question for blue and purple vegetable all the way down. So that's 10 questions. Each one is 1 point. It says maximum grade is 10. Sometimes people will set maximum grade to 100, but have 1 point for each question. And Moodle is smart enough to realize that if you've got 100 possible points, but only 10 points worth of questions, that means each question is actually worth 10, and it just scales it up. But I've found it always works better if you set the maximum grade to be what you actually want, and you set your grade to be what you actually want. You can change the mark for the question, the grade, and once you've changed it, you just have to say save. All right, so wow, 13 people have taken my quiz. Awesome. What that means is I can't change it anymore, which is why it's really important to make sure your quiz is not visible until you're ready for people to take it. So I'll use this this hidden quiz, quiz 1. So as you can see, no questions have been added. So I can either edit or I can go back to the course. And I see a question popped up. Oh, as far as I know, you have to change them one at a time. And I think there's some really good reasons for that. I couldn't tell you what they are, but I think I would be very concerned about changing them all at once. I think that would be very dangerous. So you can change the maximum to be the weight instead of the marks, and Moodle will take care of the math for you. I tend to not like that, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means I don't like it. And you know, in a perfect world, everyone would agree with everything I say, and that would be amazing, but it's not a perfect world. So one of my coworkers is over here giggling because he's joined me in my presentation. Chris, come over and say hi. This is Chris Ortega, down. They can see your chest there.
Hello.
All right, that's Chris. He's a terrific resource for so many things in what I do. Okay, so yeah, and you can set the default point when you create the question, and that might be a better way to do it. I tend to just let my questions default to 1 point. But if you're doing like a multi-answer question, you could set it to like maybe there's 3 correct answers. So maybe it's worth 3 points and each correct answer gives you a point. I will tell you on what I'm showing you right now, I would not recommend that because it'll mess up your numbers. Because if you've got, say, 10 questions and each of them is worth 10 and your passing grade is 80, then 8 questions have to be answered correctly for credit. But if one of the 10 questions is suddenly worth 3 points, Nope, I'm not doing that math, even if it's after 12. I only do math between 11 and 1, and sometime usually between 12 and 1, I have lunch. So I limit the math, and that's math I don't even want to do. All right, so we're going to click Edit Quiz. So there's nothing here. How do I add questions? I click this button here, and I can either add a new question, which is this way leads to craziness because you create it, you say, I want a multiple choice question. This is adding totally new. And this is set to default, which I love. That's great. Sometimes it will default to, quiz. So sometimes it'll default to quiz 1, and I don't want that. Nobody wants that. That way causes chaos and pain. So if you're lucky and it defaults to your default, that's top notch. But if you're not lucky, this is how you end up with things at the activity level. Yeah, let's not. Okay, so yes, this potentially could be creating the question at the activity level, Sasha. That's right. All right, so I'm going to back up. I'm not going to actually create a question. Yes, I'm sure. Thank you for being so helpful. All right. So in reality, I really want to go with one of my 2 possibilities, from a question bank or a random question. I'm using pools. I want to select one question of those 7 from each thing. So I want a random question. So I don't want the default course. I want a question about blue or purple for vegetables. So it shows me. And I can choose how many random questions. Maybe I want them to take all of them. I can, well, okay, I could say 10 and then bad things would happen. Never choose a random number of questions that's larger than the actual number because that's going to cause you trouble. But I could say 7, random question. And suddenly I have 7 questions that will randomly appear on my quiz from the blue question. But I don't really want that, so I'm going to delete some. And as long as nobody's taken my quiz, I can add and delete to my heart's content. Now, another way, if you want to add multiple questions, you can say select multiple items. Oh, never mind.
Remove multiple questions, right?
Pardon?
You can remove multiple questions if you select multiple items.
Yes, if you have several of them, we'll do another random. Let's take a look and see how that works. Okay, I don't want 7, but maybe I want 3. We'll try 3 and see if it will. Oh yeah, I did a bad thing.
Select multiple items, then you can check
Yeah.
multiple questions and
Correct.
get rid of
Yes.
multiple ones instead of doing one at a time.
That's the question, right? And then I can just click select deleted, delete selected, and read it backwards.
Sorry,
So,
I was going to interrupt you because Jessica asked, how do you create a subcategory?
the same way you create a category. So we'll go back to the top quiz. We'll go into question bank. This is another way to get to question bank. So no, I want categories up here. Okay, so if I want to create specifically purple fruits, I just type in the name and I add the category. And now there's a subcategory of purple in my blue purple vegetables section. So I could have just as easily said, you know, blue and purple and had one category that was vegetables and one that was fruits. It just depends on what works for you. Okay. Yeah, it just depends on where you want it and how you want it to look and what you want to do. All right, so back to the quiz, back to editing the quiz. Be really careful, edit settings and edit quiz do not mean the same thing. Edit settings will edit your actual quiz settings, like do they get feedback? Yeah, sometimes having 2 windows is super nice. That's absolutely true, Rick. So so right now my quiz has 2 questions. I'm going to preview it. And 2 questions, here we go. Which fruit is blue or purple? We know it's not lemons and we know it's not pomegranates. pretty sure it's not apples, although there might be some weird apples out there. It's probably going to be blueberries. So I decided I don't really want to look at this preview. I want to try a new one. Yeah, I'm sure. And look, I have a totally, well, okay. The other thing I'm going to point out is this randomization. It randomizes not only your questions, but also your answers if you want it to. There we go. We got a new raspberries are a blue or purple fruit. We got, it just randomly selects. So every time somebody takes the quiz, you get a new selection of questions, which is really nice. And this is one of those that's multi-answer. So let's see, blue, purple. Well, there are purple carrots, there are purple potatoes, and there are purple eggplant, and there's also purple asparagus. So sometimes you can be really, you know, sneaky. I wouldn't call it importing them into categories. Let's see. We'll go out and go to the bank. So, oh, show all my questions. All right. So if I decide I want, just for the purpose of argument, I'm going to say I'm going to create a category called fruit. And I want all fruits in there. And then I go to my questions and I'm just like, I don't want to have to manually move each one. Okay, so red fruit, green fruit, green fruit, green fruit. I got all these green fruits and I want all these. I want them to go into fruit and you just move them over. If you have something like a gift format, you have manually created this gift document, which I'm just going to say gift is not that much of a gift. There is a way to tag them, to put them into categories, but to be honest, I can't tell you how to do that. I've probably done it, but it would have been more than 3 years ago. And I didn't do it very much back then. But it's supposedly possible. Yeah, you can absolutely move them. That's the really neat thing. You just saw me move 6 of my questions from 6 of my random questions into the fruit category. We'll pretend for a second that that fruit category is actually the activity level. All I have to do is say, I don't want that. Okay, before I do that, I gotta move this. All right, so I don't actually want that question in that category. I want that to go back into red fruit. And it's that easy.
But if you created at the activity level, if you created the questions at the activity level, you have to get to those questions by going through the quiz, right? Or through the activity?
No, you can get to them. Okay, so top question bank takes you here.
Because the default for quiz 1 doesn't show unless you go from the quiz.
You're right.
Like.
Yeah, that's true. You do have to go to the quiz before you can actually access that. But as we've kind of looked at, it's super easy to get to the bank regardless of where you go. So I moved red fruit. Did I move red fruit back to where I wanted it? Well, let's hope. I'm going to move all my green fruit questions to, if I wasn't blind, there, that's helpful. Now it's back to, now my categories look normal again. And red fruit is 8, yes. I will say when I got a little crazy with my questions, and the last red fruit question is a, well, that's not it. Okay, that's not the one. Oh, because I picked the wrong one. Red fruit 8, that's the one. I added pictures from Unsplash from those of you who got to see it. Got to see people talking about Unsplash. So you can do like a multi-choice. This is a pomegranate. And this is an apple, if I could see it. And these are cherries. And you can always check your stuff to make sure it's doing the right thing. Okay, now I need to close my preview. All right. Okay, so we're kind of out of time. I think I covered most of the things I'd intended to. I do want to say, one of the reasons I asked you earlier about whether or not you used plugins is because if you have question banks, you can, and you use, say, the games module, you can use the questions in these categories in your games. So I can't demonstrate that because I don't think games is in the Mountain Moot site, and I know it's not on my public site because I've been having trouble with getting it to work on my site for some reason. But you can do things like create really neat activities like crossword puzzles. There's a Sudoku activity. The games module is really cool. And they've got Hangman. I've never actually used Hangman because when I used Quiz-a-Lot, I was in corrections, and I was told that would be very distasteful to use Hangman in a, you know, death penalty state where we used to, in fact, that was the method we used. So, you know, I wasn't allowed to use that. But it's a really cool module. So you can do that. I'm sure there are other plugins, I couldn't tell you what they are, that use those. Now, okay, I'm really running out of time. But I'm going to say really quick, a lot of people get confused with Question Bank because they're just like, it's the question bank. I can use these questions on Questionnaire. I can use these questions on Feedback. I can use these questions in Lesson. No, you can't. Lesson doesn't talk to Quiz. Questionnaire doesn't talk to Quiz. Feedback doesn't talk to Quiz. They're not even the same kinds of questions. They look the same, but they're not the same. The only exception to that is you can create all your question banks, export them to a Moodle XML file, and then go into Lesson and import them. And then you can use them. But then if they change, you have to change them in both places. Used to be, if you imported questions into a lesson, you could only do it before you'd added any pages. But apparently, newer versions allow you to do it anytime, which is very cool. The neat thing about putting questions in a lot, like questions like what we've done in question banks in a lesson, is you can create clusters. And it goes to the cluster, and you get one question, and then you jump to the next one. And they can go through it as many times as they want, and it's not really, you know, a big deal. So question banks are super powerful. I have so many, yeah, low stakes. That's right. That's it exactly. The quizzes that I talk about from corrections that were 54 questions, we had, because we didn't have, like, we couldn't really randomize the questions themselves. We would randomize the answers because the questions had to be in one order. And we had people who would literally sit in the same room together and take the quiz. And one of them would say it's the first answer, and they'd all answer the first answer. But the first answer wasn't the same consistently across all of them. Sometimes they weren't even taking the same quiz because they were, you know, there was more than one profile. And the first time it ran, this guy calls me and says, I don't understand why Joe passed and I didn't. We answered exactly the same way. And I said, the reason you didn't pass is because you cheated. You sat in a room and he said it's A and you chose A, but A is not the same answer for you. Oh. How did Moodle know that? And I'm just like, because I told it to do that. 2 years later, I didn't do that course. Wasn't in charge of that course anymore. I'd passed it on to somebody else and was doing something else. And the person running the course comes to me and says, you know, that story you used to tell? Yeah, I still tell it. He says, yeah, the weirdest thing happened. Today I got a call from this guy, and he said, I was sitting in a room, and Ted said, you know, and we went through it as a group, and, you know, Ted said this, and And I said, ah, that was Richard, wasn't it? And he looked at me, how did you know? And I was just like, because I had the same conversation with Richard 2 years ago. So it really works for, undermining cheating a bit. And when you use banks, all that shuffling around, questions being, sometimes your question is not in the same place, sometimes it's not even the same question. It really makes it harder. And if they want to print it out and share it with people, like a lot of people have to print it out. And you know what? I'm okay with that. Because if everybody's printing them out and they're sharing them and they're looking at them and trying to figure out what it all means, they're learning something. And that's all I want. All right, so we are like 2 minutes till the next session, so sorry I went over. But it's been great. I hope this was helpful. Thanks so much for attending.